Welcome to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now, a weekly podcast diving into what matters in Israel and the Jewish world right now. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with thought leader, author, public intellectual Micah Goodman, who is also my friend and neighbor. Hi, Micah. Thanks for letting me be outside your house. So listeners, if you hear any kind of noises, it's all Micah's fault. We're hearing his birds.
Yes, finally, the voices of life.
Exactly. And so it was my choice to be outside and hear the construction and the birds and the neighbors, pesky neighbors. But I just want to feel as much life as possible in this week. Wouldn't you agree, Micha?
100%. If there is a vibe in Israel now that something very big has ended, and it seems like something new is beginning.
Okay, so on that theme, we here in Israel celebrated yesterday Simchat Torah, and I think abroad Jews are celebrating it today. Is that right, Micha?
I think this is Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot.
Exactly. So another reason to make Aliyah. But I would have to say that I keep thinking over and over how smart our sages were to have this holiday in which you end reading the 5 books of the Torah and immediately begin. It's the ending and simultaneous, instantaneous renewal and re-beginning. And I can't help but think about that this week.
Yeah, this is, you know how when the French organize their own history, they speak about the First Republic, the Second Republic, the Third Republic, right? It's like every time they go through critical mass of change, they say, okay, now it's a whole different France. And there goes time, we're not the Fourth Republic anymore. From now on, we're the Fifth Republic. Now, I know there's also a constitutional element that happens in order to move to a new republic, but I don't learn a lot from the French, but here's something I think we can learn from them. And if we take that model and we read that model into Israeli history, so I think it'll be fair to say that from 1948 until October 7th, we had 2 Israeli republics. The first Israeli Republic was from 1948 till 1977. The first Israeli Republic was founded by David Ben-Gurion. It was the Republic of Mapai, Mifleget Poalei Eretz Yisrael. It was the working class. The ethos was socialism. The founders were secular. The vibe was more Eastern European. It had a flavor, this first Israeli Republic. And then in 1977, Menachem Begin is the founding father of the Second Israeli Republic.
So what was the flavor of that? It's not as if he wasn't European.
So the ethos, first of all, the ethos wasn't socialist. It was more capitalist. It wasn't Ashkenazi. Now it becomes more diverse. The Mizrahim were coming in. It wasn't secular. It was more traditional. It was a different Israel, a different vibe. A lot, obviously, has been written about these 2 Israeli republics. Maybe not named that way, but we know that until now we had 2 different versions of Israel. Now, what was the moment that put an end to the first Israeli Republic and gave birth to the second Israeli Republic? The Yom Kippur War. Or you know what, Amanda, if I'll be even more accurate, those 6 years between 67 and 73. The 6-Day War plus Yom Kippur War created such a dramatic change in the character of Israelis that it led to the second Israeli Republic.
Just to sharpen that slightly before you get into your theory of everything more, these years between 1973 and 1974, so you see this as a preparation, as laying the groundwork for the Second Republic?
Yes, the Second Israeli Republic wasn't born the day after the Yom Kippur War. It took time for the things to sink in. But after the dramatic events of 6-Day War and 73, now 6-Day War changed Israelis. They became very euphoric. 73 changed Israelis. They became very disenchanted. They lost faith. Now we know how a post-victory Israel looks like. That was post-6-Day War. We know what it looks like when the establishment fails, where Israelis are disenchanted, where Israelis lose trust in all the systems. That's Israel of post-73. What happened the past 2 years, we've experienced 73 on steroids because the failure of the intelligence community was a greater failure. The collapse of the systems in the beginning of the war was a greater collapse. The loss of trust was a greater loss of trust. This is a moment that's larger than 73, but this war has also repeated the 67 moments. The pagers, Nasrallah, or Iran, the 12-Day War, Syria collapsing. We saw in front of our eyes the power, the might, and the brilliance of the Israeli military. And so how does society, we know how a society post-67 war looks like. We know a society post-73 war looks like. How does society that experienced both simultaneously and intensely within 2 years, how does that kind of society looks like?
So are you hypothesizing that we're on the brink of the third Israeli Republic?
I think that these events are are obviously a tectonic shift in Israeli history. And just like the 73 war put an end to the first Israeli Republic, this war is going to put an end to the second Israeli Republic, and the third Israeli Republic is going to be born. You were speaking about Simchat Torah, about something ending, something beginning. It's very obvious in Israel that a new age is beginning, which means that this generation, the generation of Israelis that fought this war, are the founding fathers of the Third Israeli Republic.
Okay, and we heard that actually in the Alternative Families Memorial on October 7th, on the night of October 7th, which in itself is kind of a huge statement, meaning these families, these bereaved families, are recognizing October 7th, whereas the Israeli government is recognizing a totally different day, right? Here in Israel, it begins tonight, Wednesday night through Thursday is the actual official Memorial Day. We already see a huge schism just in that. And in the final speech at the memorial, I assume you heard it, we had Yonatan Shimbris saying essentially, we are the people who are going to rebuild this country.
Because the story of October 7th is a story that when Israel didn't save Israelis, Israelis saved Israel. And that is the most dominant sentiment in Israel today, that regular patriotism, we have patriots all over the world, and patriots always feel like they belong to their country. In Israel, patriots feel like the country belongs to them, that they own it, that it's theirs. October 7th enhanced that, and that critical moment where Israel didn't save us, but we saved Israel, where everything is reversed, everything is upside down. And that is the new bubbling awareness of this great generation. That after it saved Israel, now it's going to be now they're going to be the founding fathers of the third version of Israel.
Okay, what you're saying just makes me think of that famous, Ani Ma'amin song and prayer, etc. That, and though I may tarry, the Mashiach, the Messiah, is coming. And putting it in the context of what you're saying about the beginning of the Second Republic, it could be a bit.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about a process. It's a process. It's a process of birth. But the interesting thing is you're saying Ani Ma'amin, this all sounds very utopian.
Yes.
And very messianic. I actually think that the Israel is being born out of these moments is actually a very non-utopian Israel, non-messianic Israel, hyper-pragmatic Israel.
I love this. So let's dive in. Why?
Right. So utopian thinking is actually an abstraction of infantile thinking. Children, what do children want? Children tell their parents, Daddy, Mommy, please make the problem disappear. Make the problem go away. And adults usually understand that problems are not here to go away. They're here to deal with. But then sometimes people turn to their governments and say, please make the problem go away. And pragmatic political leaders turn to the people and say, the problem is not going away. We have to deal with it. Now, if let's say you're sitting in Nir Oz and you're looking to the west at Gaza, for many years, the left sold you a fantasy. The problem will go away. They'll stop hating us. They'll accept us. All we have to do is offer them an independent Palestinian state and there'll be peace and reconciliation. The problem will go away. The right also sold the fantasy. And throughout this war, this fantasy grew. The problem is going to go away. It's not that the hate will go away, but the Arabs will somehow disappear. They'll be transferred. They'll leave. We'll resettle Gaza. These are two utopian ways of thinking, which are obviously there's a large distance between the two, but they're tapping into the same instinct. Make the problem disappear. The right was saying the Palestinians will disappear. The left is saying their hate will disappear. And I think now a majority of Israelis understand not only Are the Palestinians on the other side of the fence here to stay? Also, their rejection of Israel is here to stay. Now, let's deal with that. Now, how did this double recognition, how was that born? Obviously, October 7th and the attacks of the October 7th was a massive blow for the fantasies, the utopian fantasies of the left, obviously. And everybody knows that, right? Israelis are today very hyper-suspicious, have no trust in the intentions of the other side. Hyper-suspicious. And which means when it comes to our security, we have to have the ability to protect ourselves by ourselves, not trust anything. That's very, very pragmatic. But we thought throughout this war that while the fantasies of the left are being shattered, the fantasies of the right are being cultivated. And we see the right speaking about not only the far right, about resettling Gaza, about annexation in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, about transfer of the Palestinians, of the Arabs to somewhere else. Like, okay, so one fantasy is destroyed, and a second utopian fantasy that's similar to the fantasy of the left, not connected to reality, that fantasy is growing. But what happened in the past 2 weeks is very exceptional, and people aren't seeing this, is that when Netanyahu signs the 20-point plan, what he's actually doing, he's giving up all the fantasies of the right. Let's just go through this. One, the whole idea that the disengagement is reversible. Now the Netanyahu far right-wing government signed an agreement that effectively says this engagement is irreversible. What happened in 2005, the disengagement from Gaza, that the whole fantasy of the right is to reverse that, that's irreversible. That's one. Two, annexation in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria is not going to happen. And three, the 20-point plan has a vision, not something that's going to happen tomorrow morning, but has the idea that Judea and Samaria and Gaza would be governed by the same entity, a de-radicalized Palestinian Authority, whatever that is.
Technocrats.
A technocrat. And that was a taboo on the right, and Bibi violated that taboo. And in that document, it speaks about a possibility of a pathway towards Palestinian statehood. So you're asking now, how did that happen? Now, this is something that needs to be understood. When Bibi's far-right government gives up on annexation, gives up on the reversibility of the disengagement of 2005, and says the word Palestinian state, when all that happens under this government, that means that these ideas are buried for a very long time.
Okay, Micah.
Let me just because think about it. If this government did not annex the West Bank, if this government after October 7th did not reverse the disengagement, so any government in the future, even if it's a right-wing government, we'll probably never have such a right-wing government like this one. Now it has legitimacy not to do any of those moves. Because if this government, with Bibi, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir, if they didn't do annexation in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, and they didn't reverse this engagement, so any government in the future won't do it. So here's the paradox of this moment. Throughout this government, many people thought, including myself, that this government is promoting an extreme messianic agenda. And it really was. It was promoting those. But the paradoxical, the ironic result of this government is that this government has crippled, if not ended, these fantasies for a very long time. Because if this government didn't do it and gave up on it, any government in the future there'll be much less pressure on the far right to direct it at them to promote those kind of policies. So paradoxically, the government that crippled right-wing fantasies is the most right-wing government we've ever had.
Okay, I feel like halavai, I wish, everything that you're saying. But on the other hand, I feel like you're building a table on two legs because you're ignoring the one leg that caused all of the additional agreements, meaning the leg that says that Hamas will demilitarize, right? The leg that says that this has to happen before that there is a pathway to a Palestinian state. And this leg that Hamas would demilitarize, I don't see that ever being established.
Me neither. No, this government, no. This deal is not going to lead to an independent Palestinian state.
Okay.
I want to remind you, the fantasies of the left are shattered also. But just like an independent Palestinian state living in coexistence with Israelis, that idea is dead for majority of Israelis. It turns out also annexation and reversing disengagement from Gaza, that idea is also dead for majority of Israelis. That's what's so interesting at this moment. Look at the two bookends of this war. The beginning of the war was a blow for the fantasies of the left. The end of the war was a blow for the fantasies of the far right.
And yet today, of course, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich today was talking about creating settlements in Gaza, because I think a lot of people, and obviously I want you to talk, I think a lot of people are assuming that nothing is going to move forward. Meaning, I think a lot of people are assuming that the war is not over, that the war will continue, that the IDF is pulled back to this yellow line. And very shortly after Hamas doesn't come up with the bodies, after Hamas, does whatever, it's already right now killing all of its Gazans in the streets in broad daylight, that after Hamas does X, Israel will swoop in again and the war will restart.
This war is over. Will a new war begin? My guess is if something will begin, it'll be something like what's happening in Lebanon now, where Israel is accurately targeting terrorists and Hezbollah trying to rebuild what they have. This massive war won't be rebuilt. The fantasies of Gush Katif, Bezalel Smotrich is sitting in a government that buried the fantasies of rebuilding Gush Katif, and he stayed in the government. That is their far right legitimizing the end of the fantasies of the far right. This is now, so this is an incredible moment, unnoticed, an incredible moment. What we're also finding is deeper, is that when it comes to Israeli dreams, we're divided. The left has a dream, the right has a dream. It's not the same dream. When it comes to what we dream, we're divided. When it comes to what we do, we're united. And this war showed that from the very beginning. Before we go into the war, today, majority of Israelis do not want to found an independent Palestinian state, and they do not want to rebuild Gush Katif in Gaza. So when it comes to what we need to do, we're united. And if it comes what you dream about regarding the very, the long distance, the future, that's where we're divided. And what matters is not what you dream. What matters is what you do when it comes to the questions of of political unity. And which takes me to one of the greatest paradoxes of this entire war. We've just fought a war for 2 years, where I think both statements that I'm going to say now are true. One, the country was divided regarding this government from the very beginning. There is more than 50% of Israelis do not trust the government that was leading this war. I think that's a fact, and it's very hard to argue with that fact. The second fact is that a massive majority of Israelis supported this war from the beginning to the end, which means that you had critical mass of Israelis supporting a war that's led by a government that they don't trust. Now, at the very beginning, I thought, will Israelis be able to hold on to this paradox? Can they support a war, fight in a war, die, express willingness to sacrifice themselves in a war led by a government that they don't trust? Can they pull that off? And they did. We did. That's what Israelis did. And this wasn't easy, because this war, you'd expect that the more brutal the war became, the more divided we'll be behind the war. So there was a moment where we took a massive risk to go on the heads of Hezbollah, from the pagers until the destruction of their leadership. That was a massive risk. Israelis stood behind that risk. In the 12-day war in Iran, unprovoked, I think we were provoked, but there wasn't any clear provocation. In the middle of negotiations between Iran and the United States of America, Israel attacks Iran, and Israel, across the board, Israelis support this move. But then you would ask yourself, okay, so while Israelis are united behind the very courageous and aggressive moves of this government, they were not divided. So you're just like, okay, they'll be divided, not when it comes to the act of war, when it comes to the act of ending the war. And then the war ends, and Israelis that were united during the war, they are united doing, I wouldn't say peace, I would say ending the war. So we see that from the very beginning to the very end, Israelis, which are so divided regarding the government, are so united regarding the war led by that government. Now, I don't know of any example in history where that's possible. We're almost always, like, in America's wars, when America supported the leader, they supported the war. When Americans didn't support the war, they didn't support the leader. Look at Vietnam, look at Iraq, look at World War II. It's always, there's a symmetry. You support the war, you support the leader, you don't support the leader, In Israel, you're divided regarding the leader and you're united regarding the war. And that is, you would also almost think in this very polarized world, that is impossible, because in polarized societies, when people don't trust leadership, they can't be united regarding the policies of that leadership. And Israel just pulled that off. And that says a lot about Israelis. And I want to try to analyze, what does it say about Israelis?
Okay, before you get to that, let me just ask you a question. All the examples you gave of the U.S. wars obviously were not on their borders, because the U.S. hasn't really fought a war in its own country, inside its own borders for, a gazillion years, right? And Israelis are fighting for their own homeland in the most visceral way, meaning after October 7th, and we saw the massacre in our own country of our own people. And so regardless of the leadership, the idea that there is a need for this war is so incredibly clear that it unites everyone.
But we were united every step of the way, from fighting Hamas to fighting Hezbollah to fighting Iran. And then finally, when they came to an opportunity to end the war in a way that seemed reasonable to us, we were united there also. Now, this is from beginning to end, we were united. And yes, we were united because we were attacked in our homes. And it turns out that Israelis' instincts are that, obviously, we have all over the world, there's political instincts where people hate the other side so much they forget what's good for them. And Israelis are polarized. Israelis on the right despise Israelis on the left. The Israelis on the left despise Israelis on the right. We are polarized like America is polarized, like Brazil is polarized, like Sweden is polarized. Polarization is a mind virus, and it's spreading all over the world, and it's self-destructive. But throughout this war, Israelis' instincts, their love for life, were stronger than their polarized, than their divisive instincts, their hate for the other side of the political aisle. And that is an Israeli phenomenon, which is it's not a coincidence. Because if we're asking, okay, at this moment we're after something very big, and we might be before something very big. If you listen to President Trump, and even if you listen to Netanyahu, we understand that that there'll be an attempt for now history to march towards normalization. Okay. And if we think about where does that take Israeli society? And I want to make a prediction that even if I'll get this wrong, it doesn't mean it still taps into something that is true about Israeli society. It's true and people can see it. And that is that there isn't a division in Israel between right and left. The real division is between right and right. When Bill Clinton put his plan on the table, it created a schism between right and left. But normalization, it will be the first peace treaty. It doesn't create a schism between right and left. It creates a schism between right and right. And actually, we've seen, the 20-point document has exposed the invisible schism, not between right and left, between right and right, between the pragmatic right and the messianic right. The pragmatic right was asking what serves our national security. And if Israeli withdrawal from Gaza depends on demilitarization of Hamas, that's a deal that serves our national security and interests. We'll take it. The far right says, yes, but what about our dreams? What about annexation? What about settlements in Gush Katif? What about all our big dreams? The Bibi move was sacrificing the dreams of the far right in order to implement the interests, the national security interests, supported by the pragmatic right and pragmatic center and pragmatic center left. So what you see in this deal, it exposes something that will be also exposed much more in the weeks, months, and years to come. That the real division in Israel is not between right and left, but between the pragmatic right and the far right. And that's not only because there is a schism between the pragmatic right and the far right, it's also because there isn't a real schism between the pragmatic right and the center left. Because what October 7th did, it shattered the fantasies of the left. Most people on the center left are pragmatic and do not want to promote their dreams of, statehood and peace and coexistence. They don't believe that that's possible. And once the pragmatic right liberates itself from the fantasies of the far right, so we have a new pragmatic camp in Israel. The center right, center left, a new pragmatic. Maybe people on the left have a dream that one day we'll have an independent Palestinian state. Maybe people on the right say one day we'll annex the West Bank. But since that one day is beyond the foreseeable future, so once the disagreement moves from the present to the future, the present itself is now emptied from any real ideological or policy disagreement. And that's why this is a moment where my dream is that the Third Israeli Republic will create a new architecture for Israeli politics.
You speak, and I can see foundations being built, and I can see the dream being constructed. Maybe it's because I'm also looking at a crane across the valley, the view of houses being built. But I just wonder if the personalities that we have right now in the political sphere can allow this to take place, because unfortunately, human beings are not as logical as Micah Goodman.
No, I don't think what I'm saying is logical. I'm saying it analyzes reality in light of ideas. And what were the ideas that the Israelis are supporting? And now there is a shift towards pragmatism. And this war has pushed that shift forward. The beginning of the war did that to the left, and the end of the war is doing that to the pragmatic right. And we see that happening. But you're right that when it comes to personalities, just like, see, the Third Israeli Republic is not going to be born today. After the Yom Kippur War, it took 3 or 4 years. It's not going to be these personalities that will be the founders of the Third Israeli Republic. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Now, this is highly speculative, what I'm saying now, and maybe naive. That Bibi Netanyahu himself is on the verge of a massive change in the way he leads Israel. Because if Bibi wants to go to normalization with Saudi Arabia and Indonesia and the whole dream, the big dream, if that's his legacy, if that's his big legacy move, this is not his coalition. All right. Now, let's think what would have happened if we'd have now a leader from the center left that's trying to push Israel towards normalization. The entire right would be united against him, right? Let's say that Yair Lapid is trying to push towards normalization. The entire right would be united against him, and the leader of the right-wing camp to be united against Yair Lapid would have been Bibi Netanyahu. And therefore will be divided and paralyzed and can't ever move towards normalization. If Bibi leads towards normalization, and it's a very big if, I don't know if this is what's going to happen. It's a very, very big if. So the far right obviously will be against, but the pragmatic right will be for it. And then you'd have a massive majority, because the center left and the center would be for it. You have a massive majority. So it's very possible that we're in the following paradox, that only Bibi could lead to normalization, but Bibi's government can't lead to normalization. So anybody that really wants normalization has to think about creating a new architecture for Israeli politics, where Israeli politics is not divided into 2 camps, but to 3 camps. That's very hard for that centrist camp to be born, because that means Bibi has to divorce himself from the far right. We've never seen any hints. And also, we need the anti-Bibi camp to overcome, to want a new architecture for the Middle East and a new architecture for Israeli politics more than they want to get rid of Bibi, which is also a very big question. These are 2 very big questions. But if both sides could get over that, we might have a new architecture for Israeli politics, where it's not divided between right and left, but between pragmatics in the center and people that are still hold on to utopian politics in the extremes. So we have a new architecture. Israel is divided into 3, and a new architecture for Israeli politics could lead to a new architecture of the Middle East.
Is it First of all, isn't it just fun that we're talking about politics and for a second and not war,
Yes.
projecting towards the future of politics?
Yes.
And I do want to remind our foreign listeners that the next elections are due to be held no later than October 2026. So this is a hypothetical, very practical conversation that we're holding.
So it's possible that, so if the new architecture of Israeli politics, which I think will be one of the real characteristics of the Third Israeli Republic, because that's where Israelis are. Israelis, there is a broad, invisible Israeli consensus. We can't see it. We're divided by our dreams. Once we ask not what's right, but what works. There is a broad, invisible consensus. Will this consensus be exposed only 2-3 years from now when the Third Israeli Republic is born? That's more probable. Or will it be exposed now because of a tectonic shift of Netanyahu and the anti-Netanyahu camp? It's hard to see that happening. I would say that that scenario also has probability, but lower probability.
Okay, let me throw one hypothetical into this mix ahead of the 2026 elections. Israel has a real trend, shall we say, of hopping on a new party's camp, meaning right now we're seeing the reservists who are getting together and forming their own party. And we see people such as Yonatan Shimriz, who I mentioned earlier, who staged that amazing memorial service and has done so much throughout this war to really protest, etc. And these people, they band together. They have the support of the Israeli public because they are the ones who served. They are the bereaved. They are the people who really had skin in the game these last 2 years. And then they get together. And then the real wild card is because so many of these people are in the Rak Lo Bibi camp, the just not Bibi camp. What happens then? Because, it's huge. It could be massive. If you remember, who was it? Well, the one who looked like Mr. Magoo, Rafi Eitan, right? With the dark glasses, who created this pensioners party, and they got something like 7-8 seats. That's incredible, really. So it could be this kind of situation where they are the kingmakers.
Mm-hmm. So there probably will be a wild card. It's hard to predict what it's going to be. But, in different conversations that I have sometimes with some of the leaders of these different movements, so you realize they're tapping into something very, very powerful in Israel today. And here's, I think, what they're tapping into. A very common understanding of Israel, a portrait of Israel that majority of Israelis are carrying in their minds is the following Israel. There's Israel shel mata and Israel shel mala. There's the Israel of above and the Israel of grassroots, the Israel of the bottom. And the Israel of above is the Israel we don't trust anymore. The systems, the establishment, the leaders, the current leaders, they all have the smell of October 7th. They failed us, we don't trust them, and when we look at them, we see laziness, we see dysfunctionality, and sometimes we see corruption. And then when we look down at Israel shel mata, grassroots Israel, the Israelis that saved Israel on October 7th and fought for us for 2 years and now want to be the founding fathers of the Third Israeli Republic. Here, this is the Israel where you see it's the opposite, where you see a living spirit, you see altruism, you see a very functioning Israel, a very efficient Israel, and a very united Israel. And here's the question, is the Israel shel mala, the Israel from the top, is that unhealthy Israel? That sick Israel, is that going to trickle down to Israel shel mata? That's bad news. Or is everything that's healthy in Israel of the bottom will somehow make it up to the top and heal Israel from the top? And all these movements are talking about is the vision that the health of Israel from the bottom will move up to the top. And you have the fourth quarter, the Rivon HaRevi'i, and you mentioned Yonatan Shimriz, and you mentioned the Miluimnikim, and you mentioned, and will they make it to the top this time around? Maybe there might be a wild card, but will this energy be the energy that's the foundation of the Third Israeli Republic? Yes, absolutely, probably. And I think what they all understand is that Israel is not divided into two. It's not right versus left. They served in this war together, right-wingers, left-wingers. And see, when there isn't a disagreement about ideology, but there's only a disagreement about a personality, so this disagreement is going to end and pave the way to the invisible Israeli consensus materializing and becoming the leadership of Israel. Now, what will happen after this personality leaves and therefore the new Israeli consensus be unleashed? or will we be able to overcome now this agreement about the personality in order to enable us to implement our consensus about ideology? Those are we don't know the answer to those questions, but those are the questions that we have to cover and observe carefully in the months to come.
Micha, I've taken up way too much of your time, but I'm going to ask you one more favor. So you may remember, but my son's bar mitzvah is this weekend, and it's Parashat Bereshit. And I haven't had a chance to really begin my speech that I have to give the family members and close friends. I hope you'll be there too. And I wonder if you have just some kind of insight into Parashat Bereshit, which has so much in it. Of course, the creation of the world and the first murder. And I wonder if there's anything off the top of your head that you want to share with our listeners about Parashat Bereshit.
Just that the world, according to Parashat Bereshit, was dark. V'choshech al pnei tehom. It was radical darkness. And I was watching last night the videos of our brothers coming home. And you realize they were in the darkness literally for 2 years. And then suddenly, Yehi Or, there is light. It's not only a metaphor, Yehi Or. It's real light. They were coming out of the tunnels. And I think their returning home energized the spirit of the Israeli people that there could be light and that there is a new beginning. And that paradoxically, if I'll go return, there is a new beginning. And paradoxically, thinking about a new beginning just a month ago, was a utopian fantasy. Now it's a reality. And one more thought. The story of the Torah, it starts with creation and it ends in Deuteronomy. It ends when they are in the verge of entering the land of Israel. So you were in Egypt, you're wandering in the desert, and we make it to Israel. We're on the verge of entering, and then you start from the beginning. We never read the book of Joshua. It's not a part of our readings. We start at the beginning. It's like it's a journey towards the verge of the promised land, but never entering the promised land. And in some way, this is a narrative that cultivates the idea that some of our dreams will never be fulfilled. The people that we admire in the Tanakh are the people that did not fulfill their dreams. David HaMelech, King David, his life's dream was to build Beit HaMikdash. He was left out of his own promised land. Moshe Rabbeinu was left out of the promised land. So the Bible cultivates an admiration for the people that didn't make it, that didn't fulfill their dreams. And in that sense, the Bible has a very anti-utopian message. The journey is important. Doing your best is important. But and this is what people, now after this war, when people on the left realize their dream is not going to become a reality, we're not going to have an independent Palestinian state living with peace and harmony with Israel. And the people on the far right have to start realizing we're not going to have renewal of settlements in Gaza and annexation in the West Bank. The idea of ending the reading of the Torah before your dreams are implemented is also very powerful, and admiring the people that didn't make it, admiring the effort and not the result. These are powerful ideas that Jews injected into the psyche of humanity in history, and these are ideas I think to breathe in now in your son's bar mitzvah, in this moment of a new beginning, of this moment of Yehi Or, of Sefer Bereshit, of a new light.
Micha, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. Please check out another installment next week. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week, shalom.